I want to thank you all for attending our webinar this morning. Is there a breach in your future? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to try to answer that question and talk about the breach that is in your future. This is also our first presentation under our new Ring 0 security testing labs, which I'll be talking a little bit about throughout this conversation this morning. So we are recording this presentation. It'll be made available about a week after today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the question feature that's included with GoToWebinar here. And at the end of the presentation, I should be answering those questions. All right, so let's take a second and talk about me. I think a lot of you know who I am, and if you don't know who I am, let me just take 1 minute and quickly introduce myself. So I'm the president, and I'm the CEO of Anitian. I've got about 20 years in this IT security and information security business. I've done a lot of projects. I've helped develop products. Back in 1995, I actually discovered SQL injection, which is going to actually play fairly prominent in this presentation a little bit later. I helped develop one of the first IPS engines. I've done a lot of really fun and exciting stuff in my career here. Lately, I've been doing a lot of industry analyst work. In fact, some of you might have heard of a rather large acquisition that took place yesterday. Anitian advised on that. So we advised on Bain's acquisition of Blue Coat yesterday. We were a technical advisor on that acquisition, which was a really fun project I might have. So that's me. So what are we going to talk about today? So let me first start and just tell you what my intention is today. First thing is I want to talk about this breach that's in your future. I want to discuss that possible breach, and I want to start sort of the first part of my presentation. I want to really kind of confront the reality of that. What are the statistics? What does the data that's out there say about this breach that's in your future? And then we're going to confront some hard truths, as I like to say. We're going to talk about the key things going on in organizations and the things that we see at Anitian that make that breach come true, that really sort of support those statistics that are in the first part of the presentation. And then toward the latter end of this, I'm going to talk about how we're going to see this breach and how we're going to stop this breach. And we're going to talk about some technologies, controls, things you need to help see and stop the breach that's in your future. Now, as part of all of this, I'm also going to do a little bit of introduction to what Ring 0 is. So that's a new logo and a new sort of design that if any of you have ever known Anitian for a while, you've probably seen this new green logo that we've got. And let me just take 1 second, and I want to talk a minute about what Ring 0 is. So Ring 0 is Anitian's new security testing labs. So we took all of our testing, pen testing, incident response, all of those sort of technical testing services and put them under a new practice area and really unified them under a new methodology or approach. So what Ring 0 is really all about is this idea, this vision that we've built defense in depth networks and applications, and we've been spending the last 20 years embracing defense in depth as a security control, but we haven't really embraced it as a testing methodology. And so Ring 0 is all about testing in depth. So if we have this deep network, we need to test that. So what it ultimately is a risk-centric, holistic security testing practice, an idea that we want to cover all the bases and look at all the dimensions of your environment and test all those pieces. So this includes network and system testing, app testing, code review, helping train and develop your developers on how to write better code and how to build better development operations or DevOps programs, social engineering. The key sort of thing to our process is that all of these services have integrated risk assessments. So our innovative Risk Now process that we developed is integrated into all these services. So they're very risk-centric. We don't just plop down a lump of vulnerabilities and say, ooh, have fun, fix that. We try to put everything in context to your business, to your network, to who you are as a company. So that's the high level of Ring 0. And as we go through this presentation and talk some more about it, I'm going to come back at the end and talk about how Ring Zero really makes a difference here. But I want to jump into this reality now of breaches. And I have some statistics for you. So I got a few slides here that some of you might find shocking. I didn't find all of these statistics terribly shocking because at Anitian we kind of live and breathe these every day. So for us, they were sort of like, yep, yeah, that makes sense. But I think some of you might find some of these statistics quite shocking. And I'm going to start with really what I consider probably one of the most important statistics. And this is this idea of dwell time. So I don't know if you've even heard of this idea, but this is a concept that's starting to gain popularity or mind share in the industry, the concept of dwell time. What that really means is that when somebody breaks into your environment, or an intruder or malware or attacker or whatever, how long do they kind of linger around in that environment? Because the longer they linger, the more damage they can do. It takes time to actually hack an environment and exfiltrate data. If you look at the Target attack, for example, the hackers were in that environment for months and were able to set up shop and build entire virtual command and control infrastructures. The type of hacking and exfiltration that takes place today isn't something that happens in seconds and minutes. It actually takes quite a bit of time. And so we want to look at how long are these people dwelling in the environment. Well, when we pulled the statistics, this is pretty shocking, if you ask me. 200 days, not hours. 200. That's a better part of a year. That means, on average, malware hackers are lingering in your environment upwards of months, 6+ months. That should be shocking to any of you, because in order to really protect the business, in order to really stop a breach, we need to bring this number way down. We need to bring this to hours, if that, even that. We're not going to probably reduce it to 0. And you got to, that's another misnomer of this whole process, is we're not going to get dwell time down to 0, but we got to bring it. We certainly got to bring it down off of 200 days. I'd encourage all you to really keep this concept of dwell time in your mind, because I think this is going to be, first off, this is an important metric in security, and it's an important metric that's frankly, it isn't very new to the Defense Department. So defense networks and defense contractors, they monitor and have been monitoring dwell time for a long time. It's actually a very, very common concept. If you look at common defense contractors like Raytheon and other things like that, that's actually a very central concept in the products and technologies they build, is how do we reduce dwell time in the environment. So this is probably big statistic number 1. Here's big statistic number 2. The most attractive data to hackers or to attackers are credentials. Now the first thing you know is, whoa, wait a minute. Everybody tells me it's HIPAA data, it's PCI data. Well, it is. Those are the most valuable in terms of money. HIPAA data, or healthcare data, excuse me. Healthcare data is extremely valuable right now. It's actually more valuable than credit card data, right? It's like a 10-to-1 sort of ratio. Well, how do you get that data? You need credentials. Credentials are the kind of gateway attack to any sort of serious exfiltration. When somebody has credentials, they can get into anything. And more importantly, they can get into things without being seen. Once I have legitimate credentials to your environment, right, or an attacker, maybe not me, but an attacker has legitimate credentials, they can pretty much do whatever they want. So the number one thing that any attacker is going after is getting those credentials, which means they're going to attack places where they can get credentials. They're going to attack things like proxies. They're going to attack things like Active Directory systems. They're going to use phishing campaigns to harvest credentials out of your environment. If you look at a lot of the big attacks, what they go after first is how to get credentials out of your environment. Okay, next statistic. This is depressing. This is a sad statistic. This actually comes out of the, I think, the Verizon breach report. 71% of breaches are discovered by outsiders. That means that the majority, a pretty significant majority, right, of breaches that happen get discovered by people who don't even work there. Law enforcement, other third parties, whatever. What does this tell you? It tells you that organizations can't see what's going on. The majority of organizations do not see these breaches happening. They don't even know about them until basically somebody calls them and says, you know, there's lots of credit cards being stolen from your company, and we've kind of traced it back to you. Oh, really? What do you mean? You know, I thought we were all, you know, we were good to go. We got that, you know, that checkbox audit. We're good to go. Why? Yeah, I don't understand. This statistic should really put all of us sort of on notice, because, frankly, this should be 21% or 2%. We should be able to discover these problems long before somebody else does. Now, this is a statistic I could haggle, we could all haggle with, but it frankly doesn't surprise me, right? 2% of systems are fully patched. To be honest, there's some places I'm surprised it's even as high as 2%. Plenty of places this is more closer to 0%. And in other places, maybe it's as high as 10%. What this really gets down to is really the ultimate challenge of an organization and keeping our systems up to date. And it is a difficult challenge. But the flip side of this is that at any given point, at least a significant percentage of your organization's assets, your systems, your workstations, your servers, your switches, your routers, your environment, has well-known vulnerabilities available and on those systems that any attacker can exploit. Things like Heartbleed and Poodle and Shell Shock and all these big breach, you know, all these big things that have been out there in the news, they exist right now in your environment. And if I'm an attacker, I've got ample tools to exploit those vulnerabilities. And that's the problem here is that when we don't have really good patch management, containment, and control, and all these things, it becomes, frankly, relatively trivial. Once we're in, once we've got those credentials, we can just start taking over systems left and right. Primary motivation for all hackers is pretty much crime. People like to froth and they get all sort of emotional, you know, they talk about cyber terrorism and, you know, the Chinese are out to get us. What are we going to do about this? And, you know, oh my gosh, you know, we got to screech and froth and, you know, look at a bunch of code and flip out and have a webinar. Oh, wait a minute, we're having a webinar. It ultimately comes down to crime. People just want to steal things. And guess how long crime has been part of the human condition? Pretty much since we crawled out of the cave. Crime is everywhere. Crime has existed since the beginning of time. You are not going to stop people from wanting to steal. Okay, there's really nothing we can do about the motivation of hackers. You know, this is the problem with people frothing about China. Oh my God, what are we going to do about China? We're going to absolutely do nothing about China. Because what the heck would we do? Bomb them into oblivion? Oh, that's a brilliant solution. We're going to do nothing because we need to do and we need to focus on what we can affect, which is opportunity. Right? Crime has all two components, opportunity and motivation. And there's really nothing you can do about the motivation of criminals. Okay? Now, one thing you will notice that's not on here is that cyber terrorism thing. Because do you know how much cyber terrorism there is in the world? Pretty much zero. There's a great little image that I put on LinkedIn a while back ago that showed the number of electricity outages due to cyber terrorism and the number of outages due to squirrels. Squirrels have the cyber terrorists beaten hands down. So, you know, the question is, where's the war on squirrels? It's a funny little point that really everybody should hear and think about, which is that cyber terrorism is a nothing issue. It's crime. It's these crime syndicates. Now, this, for me, is personally one of the most painful statistics to look at. And here's why. 20 years ago, I discovered SQL injection. I copy-pasted a SQL query into a form field on an extremely early version of an e-commerce website. It passed on through to IIS 1.0 or whatever they had at Microsoft at that time. And the database, SQL Server 4 or whatever we were using, dutifully returned the response to my query. I had no idea what I had done. I didn't quite even understand it at the time. And I tried to get the developers of the site to really understand the seriousness of this problem, and I really wasn't able to, partially because I just didn't have the language. Here we are 20 years later. The dominant attack tactic remains SQL injection. And the simple reason being is because it's so incredibly powerful. What's really depressing about this statistic is SQL injection is actually fairly easy to get rid of. There's a lot of relatively straightforward things you can do with an application to eliminate any chance of SQL injection. There's technologies, there's web application firewalls and those kinds of things, but simply just redoing components of your app, parameterizing inputs, things like this. It's really kind of sad because when we think about this, SQL injection has been around for 20 years, and we still really haven't solved the problem. It's still a dominant problem. Now, you'll notice that when you actually look at the statistics kind of behind the scenes here, you'll notice that unknown is number 2, which you could probably guess there's probably a fair amount of SQL injection on that, too. They just didn't know. But then account hijacking is number 3. When you get right down to it, though, to some extent, SQL injection and account hijacking all kind of similarly point to the same thing, which is credential stealing, getting access to things. One of the things that's so powerful about SQL injection is that it does allow you to kind of bypass and get in and get credentials and get data. So what this tells us is application security is incredibly important, and it tells us that we need to focus a lot on that. I could spend the next 6 hours here running through all these statistics and charts and things, but there's one question we really want to answer, which is there a breach in your future? And the answer is pretty clear. Of course there is. Yes. You have a breach in your future. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? Now, why do these people do it? Why does this all happen? What does it all mean? Well, the thing you got to understand about today's intrusions, about the world of today, about the security of today, is that it's all about your pain and causing you pain. And that is, today's attacks are pervasive, aggressive, incessant, and nimble. What we mean by that is they're everywhere. You're getting attacked constantly, okay? Every hour, every minute of the day. They're aggressive. They're not going to give up because of whatever. They're incessant, meaning they're going to keep at you, and they're going to keep at every conceivable dimension of your environment they can. And they're nimble, which means they can move into different attack tactics. Remember, an important thing about attacks, an attacker or malware is a unidimensional attack, meaning the attacker only needs to be successful once to get in and get what they want. Your role, on the other side, you have to defend everything. So you have a multidimensional mission, whereas an attacker has a unidimensional mission. Now here's the thing. Attackers don't care that you didn't get budget. They don't care that your security program aligns to an internationally approved framework of synergistically aligned controls. They don't care that you're PCI compliant. They don't care that you just ran that checkity check box little compliance thing last week. They don't care that you hired the lowest bidder on your last RFP, right? They only need to be successful once, and all of those factors that we churn and chew about night and day don't really matter to them, because one unpatched system, one SQL injection attack, one harvesting your credentials from a phishing attack, they've got what they need, and they're going to start causing you pain. That pervasive, aggressive, incessant, and nimble. Now, let's face some hard truths here. How did we get here? What makes these statistics really happen? Well, we've been studying this problem in Anitian for a long time, and we have a lot of thoughts and ideas as to why we've gotten here. The first one, in my opinion and in our opinion, is this problem, this incredibly incessant problem, schizoid security. This is the problem of security is the most important thing to our business. We absolutely need to focus on security. Security is important. Everybody needs to make security a top important. Absolutely, it's the top #1 thing up there. But absolutely, you need to shut off all that security stuff. We cannot have any of that security, technology, or we can't block anything ever because we might lose 1/1 billionth of a cent somewhere, possibly, theoretically, one day. No, 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 no. Shut everything off. Turn it all off. I'm the CEO. I don't have to abide by any rules. What's going on here is the schizoid nature of security is important to us, but of course we don't care about it at all. Now, what happens when you have kind of a two-faced friend like that? That at one hand tells you what a great friend you are, but on the same time turns around and stabs you in the back, right? You don't trust that person. This is one of the biggest and first and most egregious trust eroders in organizations. This notion of something that's important, but we'll turn it off at a moment's notice when it's inconvenient to us. Schizoid security is what starts us down the path of that 71% of breaches get detected outside, SQL injection attacks. That's what gets us started on this process. What keeps us going? Those check box audits we get. Those audits of, hey, yeah, that looks great. Yeah, you're good to go. All checked off. Got that PCI thing all taken care of. You don't need to worry about nothing. I didn't look at anything because who cares? You just got to get it all taken care of. Checkbox audits are horrible. Are absolutely horrible because they're so incredibly destructive. Not only do they just give you a completely false sense of security, but they erode trust even further within the organization. And unfortunately, we have a whole industry of auditors who've cropped up that serve this as, with all the euphemisms that they can. Compliance as a service is one of the ones we hear a lot. You just sign onto a portal, you fill a few forms out, you're good to go. It's all taken care of. You're compliant. You're totally secure and everything's wonderful. And it's just pointless. It's a complete waste of time, but it keeps that trust eroding process. And once we get down into the bottom of that trust eroding process, guess who's there wringing their hands, ready to take advantage of you? VARs and vendors. No offense, salespeople. I got a few of my sales guys on this. Sorry, guys. Not these guys. Those other guys. You buy things you don't need, or you buy things you're never going to use. We see this so often. We call it being VAR'd to death. The VAR comes in. I used to be able to, at some point in my career, I could walk into a data center and I could look at the servers and the equipment they had, and I know exactly which salesperson had gotten their new Corvette off of the sales in this company. Because you could just see the canal. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know who that guy is. Yeah, he sold you that. You're never going to make use of that. And it's for us, and having done this for a long time, it's sad because we understand and we love technology too. I love new technologies. For example, security analytics is an absolutely phenomenal and fascinating emerging class of technologies. Blue Coat, which just got acquired, their Solera product, oh my gosh, that thing is cool. I mean, I got a demo of it. Their Norman Shark thing that they acquired, woohoo, that thing is so neat. I want 12 of them. I could play with them all afternoon. But the problem is that while they're so totally ultimately cool and they can do all this great stuff, if you don't have the staff to make that work, if you don't have the process, if you're not mature enough to handle this, then you're going to end up buying something that's going to, one, waste time, and it's not going to actually secure anything. And it's not necessarily going to give you the insights you need. And so what ultimately happens is you start picking this stuff that's, well, it's good enough. Now, this is kind of a funny slide because, you don't need to be the best, just better than the rest. Well, being just slightly better than the rest isn't good enough anymore. So good enough isn't good enough. And if good enough is your practice for how you're going to be good enough, then you're not good enough. Have I said good enough enough? Target was good enough. Home Depot was good enough. Lots of companies are good enough. It's good enough. You got it. You got to take care of it. Don't even worry about it. It's not good enough anymore. You can't just be good. And you got to quit complaining about how you're just good enough. Complaining inside IT departments is the largest vulnerability, the worst, most pernicious malware that infects your company. Every time people stand around a room and say, yeah, fair, we don't get the right to the management wants to part of it, whine, complain. It just sucks the life out of the organization. I can tell you as a business owner, this is something that you have to have an absolute zero tolerance policy for, right? Nothing worse than than standing around complaining about things is tolerating people complaining about things. Next big problem we have is this vulnerability containment issue, this problem of trying to contain every inconceivable or every conceivable vulnerability that's out there. It doesn't work. It just flat out doesn't work. And that's why you see those numbers of 2% of systems are really patched. Containing vulnerabilities isn't a process that works. And the reason is that weakness is endemic, exploitation is epidemic. And what that really means is that the weaknesses in your environment, they're everywhere. They're endemic to the network. They exist at every conceivable level throughout your organization. And the exploitation of those weaknesses spreads. Once it's in, once there's patient zero, it just spreads throughout the whole organization. So again, this is this challenge of multidimensional versus unidimensional. Containing every conceivable attack vector is, quite frankly, an extremely difficult task. And the one vector that has us all and should have us all on our toes is probably the one that gets the least attention: third-party risk. Why do you even have security controls when the back door to your entire environment is wide open? This is how they got into Target. This is how most of the breaches happen today. Third-party risk. Now, third-party risk is a big concept because it's not just business partners. It's not just the storage company you work with. It's not just the cloud provider, but it's also those apps you buy. There's this misnomer among lots of IT people, right? We buy some commercial off-the-shelf product, we plug it in, we follow the appropriate rules. We're totally safe. We don't have to think or do anything, and that is so very wrong. Just because something's certified, like PADSS certified, for example, doesn't mean it's even remotely close to being secure. There are plenty of PADSS certified apps out there which are extremely hackable. We've done testing lately on security technologies, actually products that are supposed to be providing security products, and found that there's actually security vulnerabilities in the security products. We actually have reported some of those to third-party applications, cloud, on-prem, whatever, represent a massive risk to your organization because you're handing over the keys to your kingdom to these third parties without really any review of where they're at or what their security's like. Okay, so now we're sort of at this point of, all right, the statistics are bad. The situation is grim. What are we going to do about it? We need to see it and we need to stop it. The breach of the future, the breach that's in your organization that's going to happen, you've got to be able to see it and you've got to be able to stop it. And here's the challenge. Challenge number one. We have this multidimensional defense versus unidimensional attackers, which means our defense has to cover lots of dimensions, all the dimensions, network architecture, the whole 9 yards, because any one of those can be the avenue that the breach is going to happen, could be the catalyst. We need to take all this data, all this big data that's flowing out of all of this technology, and we need to turn that big data into actionable intelligence. That means not heat maps and graphs and metrics and boards and portals and clickety boxes, but something that makes the organization do, that puts people in motion, that when there is a serious breach or a serious issue, people don't sit around going, well, I think we should sit around for the next 600 hours and talk and theorize and conceptualize about this and have a meeting and then have a meeting about a meeting about a meeting about a meeting to talk about the meeting where we're going to have a meeting and think about what we're going to possibly one day theoretically maybe conceptually do somewhere in the future where we might possibly theoretically possibly patch something one day somewhere. You got to do. You got to cut through all the bibble babble, all the back and forthing, all the futzing and nutsing and yitzing over things, and it's got to be we have a problem, fix it, do it now, not next week, not 6 years from now, not after you have your global synergy conference where you all think it all through. Now, right this very moment. Yeah, I used to tell writers all the time that if you want to really write that next book or write that big document, right, you can have the greatest idea in the world, but at some point you got to sit your butt down in the chair and you got to peck that thing out. You got to just do. Now, we need to maximize our technical control effectiveness. We got to wring every last infinitesimal ounce of control out of every control we buy. If you're going to invest $100,000, $200,000, or millions of dollars in security controls, well, I tell you, if I spend $100,000 on a car, I'm going to push that thing to the ultimate limit that I can get. I'm going to wring every bit of fun and enjoyment out of that car I can get. If I buy $1 million home, which would be awesome, I'd love to buy $1 million home. Who wouldn't, right? I'm not going to go, oh, there you go, it's all set up, we're good to go. I'm just going to, hang out and do nothing with it. I'm going to take care of that thing. I'm going to care about it, right? Well, why do we keep buying these technologies and then we put them on the shelf or we plug them in and we go, okay, it's all plugged in, we're good to go there. Just let it go, let it make it, you do your stuff, whatever you're going to do. We got to make these controls really work. We got to enable trusting and sharing because that's what business really is all about. That means we got to be able to have security controls that can stop the bad stuff, make the hackers reduce that dwell time way down, but does not inhibit our people from being able to do what they need to do. Share and trust, because trusting is what business is all about. And it doesn't really matter what business you are in. You could even be a government, but it all basically boils down to how are we going to trust people, systems, institutions. We need to turn compliance from this checkbox process into something that we just do as a normal business, right? The PCI Standards Council introduced this idea of PCI as a business-as-usual concept. That's a brilliant idea, something we've been saying for almost 20 years. It took them a while to catch on to our idea. I'm glad they did. It's not the only idea of Anitians they adopted, but it's a great idea, and it needs to happen. It needs to happen because if compliance is just this checkbox process you go through, then that's kind of pointless, right? We need to use HIPAA and PCI and EU data and all these sort of things that are, FedRAMP and all these things that are coming out. We really need to use these to make things better and not have them be this kind of pointless checkbox process. We need to build applications that aren't just secure, they're fundamentally secure. They're built from the ground up on a foundation of security. That means the code, the hosting environment, the system, the network, every layer of that application needs to have security fundamentally integrated into it. We need to train our developers and things like that. And we need the ability to detect and reduce dwell time down to hours, not years, not months, not weeks. So what does all this really mean? Well, first off, we need to do what we've always been doing, which is we got to keep building defense in depth. We got to keep building those deep control structures throughout our environment. Most of us have been doing this. So this is, I chose not to spend a lot of time on this concept because, quite frankly, I think a lot of organizations, we know this and we're working on it. And if you need a good framework to work off of, the SANS 20 critical controls are awesome. They're not perfect, but they're a very good structure that you can go. You should have every one of those controls. And if you don't, you need to get it. It needs to be on your roadmap for what you're going to implement. Now, that 20 controls isn't necessarily all the control you need, and maybe not every control is as important as every other control, but it's the place to start. What it really comes down to is you need breach detection and protection at all the various layers in your environment, your network, the systems, the applications, data, the code, your development operations, your people and your policies, your operations. Everything needs to have breach detection, monitoring, and control integrated and fused into it. And you need to test at every single layer there is as well. And that's what Ring Zero is actually all about. In fact, that's our Ring Zero flow right there. This idea that you need to evaluate your security at every one of those layers. The biggest problem is companies say, oh, we conducted an external pen test. I'm here to tell all of you that an external pen test is probably one of the least useful security tests you can do. Do you know why? Because they rarely are successful in today's world. External pen testing is of extremely low value. You need to test way beyond that. You need to be doing application layer testing, code review, data testing, policy testing. You need to do the entire dimension of testing because you got to know where those weaknesses are. And I'll tell you right now a frustration we have, which is this notion of we want to do testing, but we don't want you to really actually test anything. That also is ridiculous. This trying to control the testing. Well, we can't have anything go down. Well, if testing brings something down, that actually tells you something really super important about your environment, and you should know that. So defense in depth needs testing in depth. And all those layers need their various controls. Your network layer, you should be segmenting with next-gen firewalls. You should be logging everything, everywhere, all the time, every time. Get a SIM, log everything to it. I get it, SIMs suck. Don't get me wrong, I don't like them any more than you do, okay? But the data is valuable. It's really valuable if there's a serious breach. Credentials need to be controlled everywhere. So those of you who've had to go through PCI compliance, you got to do that data flow for PCI data. Do the same thing for credentials. Where do credentials go in your environment? Where are they stored? Where are they being cached? You would be very surprised where credentials are cached in your environment. Recently, I was doing a project where I was doing investigation with a company. It was some analysis work I was doing, and this question of caching credentials came up, and they kind of gave an answer, and I'm like, something's not right here. It ain't lining up. And the more I dug into their app and the more I dug into their architecture, I realized they were caching credentials all over the place. And it was a very serious problem because one of the places where they were caching credentials, the box, the appliance where they were caching credentials, was susceptible to heartbleed, which means you could get those credentials right out of the memory, no problem. And, we didn't know this was a problem. It's because nobody really paid attention to where those credentials were going. You got to control your clouds. It's funny, we'll sit down with organizations all the time and we'll say, so what are you guys doing in the cloud? Oh, we don't have anything in the cloud. We don't, no cloud. Absolutely zero cloud in this company. We are not a cloud company. Oh, okay. So what do your sales guys do? Well, we have Salesforce for our sales guys. Okay, that's a cloud app. Okay, what about your email? Oh, we're using Office 365. It's awesome. Yeah, that's a cloud app too. Okay. And before we know it, they're like, wow, yeah, I guess you're right. We have pretty much everything in the cloud. Yeah, do you have any control over that? No. Do you know where the credentials are? No. Do you have any control over who actually is accessing that? No. Oh, gee, now you got a problem. The cloud is great. It's awesome. It enables all sorts of things. Don't shut it down. Don't stop it, but you got to know what's going in and out of it. You got to control content, too. You got to know who's sending what, where, why, and how. Things like secure web gateways are awesome for this. DLP technology, okay? Knowing what's going on. And again, you don't have to block it, but just know that it's there. That's that C. Mobile, controlling mobile, and doing your testing internally and externally. You need to work at the systems layer. You need to reduce the dwell time on these systems. Nothing should be happening on your systems that you don't already kind of know about. You shouldn't have spurious applications running. You shouldn't have processes rolling out of control. You shouldn't have these memory leaks and breaches that happen. Now, the way to do this is you've got to aggressively manage your configurations. You've got to aggressively manage all of the changes that didn't happen in this environment. You need to be doing a unified vulnerability and patch management program. We run pen tests, and companies have these big, long lists of vulnerabilities, and they're like, well, what should we do about it? And I'm like, you could patch all your systems. Oh, well, we can't do that. Well, then you're pretty much hopeless. Seriously, you got to patch these things. You got to fix them. And if you can't patch them, then I'd be buying the most awesome, coolest, intrusion prevention system the world offers to protect the networks where these unpatched systems are, because I'd want to be blocking and detecting and blocking just about everything, right? So I mean, I'd be calling those VARs up and saying, okay, I want to quote for Fortinets and Palo Altos and checkpoints, and let me know, because I want to block all this stuff because I can't patch inside that environment, right? If you really want to push yourself, you can go for this new emerging class of endpoint security analytics. So the big new thing are these behavior analyzers. There's a whole new fascinating class of technologies emerging. You got Carbon 9, you got Cyvera's, Palo Alto's Cyvera product, Counterattack. Checkpoint just bought this company, Hyperwise. Raytheon has got some really cool stuff coming out. It's a bunch of products in this space. The Cylance is another really cool product. Mandiant's got a bunch of junk you can put on your box. Anyways, these are behavior analyzers. They watch everything going on in the system, and they can tell you when something kind of follows a general malware infection pattern. And the idea is this kind of fills that gap between antivirus, which you do need on your endpoints, unfortunately, and the things that antivirus does not detect. But let me be very honest with you. These new endpoint analytic products, they're very new, very, very new. Some of them are pretty clumsy still, but they're very cool. Of course, you've got to get at the application layer. You have to be doing security throughout the entire app dev process, training your developers, doing code review, doing application layer penetration testing. And two things that often don't give it a lot of attention are watching out for rogue code. Well, that's becoming a big problem in today's world, right? People outsource all their development to these shops in various foreign locations, and suddenly you've got all this rogue code coming into your applications. You got open source code. You got code that comes from other places. And what happens is you publish your app, you put it out there for the world, and the next thing you know, you got a lawsuit showing up at your front door. Your biggest competitor says, we've detected that you're using our code. And before you know it, you've got yourself a patent lawsuit that's going to grind you down for years to come. Or you've got open source code in there that some developer just copy-pasted out of GitHub or Pastebin or something like this. He's like, oh yeah, this will do the job. I'll just paste that in there. Well, that just came from, from Mozilla or somewhere. And there's tools that actually do it. There's this product called Black Duck. It's a company that does scans for rogue code. Neat stuff, by the way. Also, tightly controlling your JIRA or any of your other sort of code management or check-in, check-out programs that are out there. One of the best I've seen is the company has, not only do they have really good tight controls around their JIRA, but they have two-factor authentication for all access to code in the environment. So they can definitively tie every piece of code to every developer in the environment. This is an organization with good, tight control around that code. Of course, you need to be defending yourself at the people layer. You need an engaged team that genuinely cares, because when people genuinely care about your business, your organization, and what you do, they're going to naturally follow good practices. They're naturally going to do the right thing. So you've got to do things like be conspicuously appreciative of feedback. That is, when somebody gives you good feedback or when somebody does a test for you, like a pen test, you need to be conspicuously appreciative of that, because it shows that desire to get better. Well, worst things you can do is when somebody comes in and says, I think there's a problem here and I've got a way to fix it for you, is to say, I refuse to listen to any of those ideas. You don't understand us. Because it just instantaneously erodes any kind of trust within the organization. You also need to write policies that people can actually understand and that they can actually care about. So many policies are written in this stilted, ludicrous language of, thou shalt obey thy rules of thy system's organizational regime. It's got this just ridiculous tone to them. And when people read them, they just roll their eyes and like, yeah, whatever, who cares? I ain't gonna pay any attention to this. These are human things, and they need to be human. And you need to let your people care. When somebody shows genuine care for the organization, when they show that they want to make things better, don't shut them up and send them out the door. Don't kick them out of your office. Oh, you don't understand how we do things around here. That's not the way we do things in this company. We have process and rules and metrics, and we all stand around and we puff our chests out and we talk about how important we are. You can't do that stuff, because all that makes people do is go, I don't care about you. Screw this place. I'm going to rip off all the technology. I'm going to put in black doors. I'm going to be the insider threat. Most organizations breed their own insider threats by treating their people like they're a bunch of robots who should just obey. Your people are important to you, and you need to start your security right there. And that starts with good leaders. That starts with leaders who have a good understanding of what their business is. So those of you who are in leadership positions, before you start writing policies and start meeting with vendors and VARs, before you do any of this, you need to step back and ask yourself a really important question. Why the heck are you in business? What is it that you do here? Why? That big important question of why. Why do you do what you do? I'll tell you why I'm in business. I'm in business because I care about the world. I want to make the world a better place, and I fundamentally believe security will do that. That's why I do what I do. How do I do it? Well, I got services, I got people I work with, I try to empower my team, etc. You start with why, then you can start thinking about the things that are going to prevent you from making that why happen. So you say to yourself, we're in business to, maybe you're a healthcare organization. We're in business to help people, to cure them, to make them better, right? Okay, what's going to prevent you from doing that? Well, if our Epic system went down, that would be awful. There you go, threat number one, right? Now you start thinking about threats to that why, not just threats in general, not threats that you read on Krebs's blog, not something that you heard at a conference, not the threat that the VAR who was in your office last week told you you need to be concerned about, but the threats that are a genuine threat to your why. And then you start going down that process. What are we going to do about that? How do we align our tech spend to that? We have a big, if you're healthcare, Epic is a big healthcare system, right? Well, a lot of your tech spend should be around how do you secure that, because it's probably one of the most important systems to a healthcare organization. And so your tech spend should be aligned to that. So when the VAR comes in and tells you, hey, I got this great new technology, you got to get it, it's awesome, it's hot, it's a next generation, rad, cool thing that all the big boys have, you can say, I'm sorry, that doesn't align to our tech spend. We've done a risk assessment on our organization. We have a risk-based approach to everything we do around here, and this stupid blinking box of ridiculous nonsense that you're hawking, it doesn't align with that. Have a nice life, Mr. VAR. Yeah, I know. I got a little bit of scars around VARs. You can tell, right? This is a risk-based approach, and this works. This is what's going to stop the breach in your future. Starting with an analysis of the risks, the threats, the things that are really going on in your environment. Starting with the why. Why are we in business, and what's going to prevent us from doing that? You're also going to ask yourself, why are we working with this third party, and what's the threat to our business? And when you do engage a new third party, you're not going to go, oh, you have a commercial off-the-shelf product that's certified by Yaya & Sons? Awesome, cool. Plug it in, give it access to everything. Seed it with domain credentials. No, you're going to say, I'm sorry, we need to do a risk assessment against this organization. We need to analyze the risk this presents to our business. And excuse me, Mr. Third Party, where's the penetration test on your business? Who certified this? Why did they certify this? How do you need to do third-party risk assessments on these things. And even if it's done quickly and over the course of a few hours, you still need to do it. Because the process of asking those questions is going to yield out the things that are going to reduce those statistics we saw earlier. They're going to reduce dwell time. They're going to stop that SQL injection attack. They're going to remove the opportunity for crime. What's important to understand here is that the only way you're going to stop this breach of the future is you've got to be able to see it. You can stop it, but if you can see it. And the only way to see it is to start implementing these controls and to start really, honestly, fairly testing your environment. Now, this is the last slide. I want to take just 1 second and revisit what is it that Ring Zero is going to do in all this. So Anitian's Ring Zero is really about embracing these concepts at every conceivable level. It's about building a holistic practice of testing everything. It's about integrating risk assessment into all the services we do and into integrating it everything that you need. When we do a penetration test, we don't just flop down the list of vulnerabilities. You don't get the, I mean, we of course provide the same technical results that everybody else does. But a lot of pen test reports, if you look at them, all you got to do is step back and say, what is this pen test really telling me? And the majority of penetration test reports, they're all about, look at what a rad hacker, leet dude I am. I'm leet. Look at how leet I got into your environment. I radly hacked you, and you're so hacked, and I'm cool, and I'm awesome, and aren't I cool? And the fact is that does nothing for you as a business, right? If your pen tests are all about how cool the tester is, read that last pen test you got, unless you got one from Anitian, because it's not that way, right? Read that last pen test. Pay close attention. Think about the tone of it, because I'll bet you the tone is, I'm cool, rather than you have threat, and here's how to reduce that threat. Because that's what a pen test really needs to be. It needs to be, here's the threat to your business based on the testing we just did. We tested a bunch of stuff, and we got a bunch of data, and that data says something about you. That data says this is a threat that you face, and here's the relative risk. And that is based on the industry you're in. The types of threats that affect manufacturing are not the same that affect healthcare or financial services. So Ring Zero contextualizes threat to each individual industry, size, type. We distill all that big data down into actionable intelligence, things you can do right now to make a difference. We can see those vulnerabilities that are going to cause the next breach, and we turn that into an actionable, this is what you got to do to stop that breach from happening. Now, ultimately, what it's all about is we want to accomplish two goals. We want to fuel you to make informed decisions so that you can stop these breaches. We want to give you that actionable intelligence. And lastly, we want to empower you to act. We want to empower the organization to do something. And I can tell you right now, the majority of the testing that happens in today's world just doesn't do that. It's all about them. It's not about you. And this is Ring Zero. And Ring Zero is bringing this new idea to the market. And our intention is to do all those things we talked about to deliver testing in depth. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today to listen. Does anybody have any questions? Is there any concerns? Anything? We've got about 8 minutes left before we hit the hour. Any questions or feedback? I'd also like to hear your thoughts on this presentation. This is the first time I've ever done this presentation, incidentally. And I'd really like to hear what you guys think about it. So if you can use the question feature or the chat feature, and let us know what you think about this. So, okay, so we got a security analytics question. Great, thank you. Somebody's asking, how important is security analytics? Okay, how important is security analytics? Security analytics is the future. It's where all these security technologies are heading. It's not here yet, though. So first off, I encourage you all to look at my blog entry on the Anitian blog about security analytics. We wrote a pretty extensive research paper on this. And this is a very emergent market right now. In essence, I think I can boil down security analytics pretty quickly for everybody. It's really kind of three different pieces to security analytics today. The first piece is threat intelligence, which kind of fuels any kind of security analytics. And then there's sort of two technical pieces. There's data analysis and there's behavior analysis. So on the data analysis side, you've got technologies that have the ability to kind of sift through all these logs and data and provide insight into what's going on there. So the concept is that, you know, it's no longer the problem of finding a needle in a haystack. It's finding a needle in a stack of needles, right? You have thousands of alerts. Which one of those alerts is the one you really need to care about? because the real the reality is the majority of them are just meaningless. So these security analytics, these data analytics kind of go through that. And they compare that with threat intelligence, and then they kind of spit back to you, okay, these are the big important ones. At Anitian, we actually have a managed security analytics technology as well. The other side of this is behavior analytics. Behavior analytics is through the roof right now in innovation. You've got lots of technology. So the big one that everybody, of course, knows about is FireEye, right? FireEye was kind of one of the early entrants into this market. But FireEye is not alone anymore. Behavior analytics comprises a lot of different kinds of technology. So you have sandboxing, which is what FireEye does. It's what Norman Sharp from Blue Coat does. It's what Palo Alto's Wildfire does. There's a bunch of other products in that space. Fortinet has a sandbox, which is affectionately called the Fortinet sandbox. So there's a lot of sort of sandboxing technologies out there right now. But then there's also these endpoint behavior analytic products like Counterattack, Cylance, Hyperwise, Cyvera, which watch all these, Cylance, which watch all this stuff kind of going on the endpoint, and then they report upon that. So behavior analytics is sort of an emergent field. And I'd be careful with this because a lot of these technologies are real new. And some of them aren't entirely fully baked. There's also a lot of consolidation going on. So obviously you saw Checkpoint bought Hyperwise, Palo Alto bought Cyvera. You got a lot of other acquisitions happening in this space. Of course, Bain bought Blue Coat, right? We know about that one. So I'd be careful with the security analytics market. Okay, next question. Any thoughts on managed SIM, like Arctic Wolf or similar, companies that doesn't have security staff? Okay, let me tell you a thought on this. Let me just sort of boil this down, and this is all opinion at this point, so I'm just going to give you my opinion. The biggest problem with most managed services is that you're basically outsourcing the logging, the data, you're basically kind of outsourcing the tech. You're not outsourcing what is probably the most important aspect of this, which is the analytics on that. Now, as it stands right now, security analytics is still kind of an emerging class of technologies. It really doesn't matter where you put your data, whether it's on-prem, off-prem. That's kind of like one of those decisions of, What's more important is that you have a human being and or technologies sifting through that data and looking for things that present an interesting target or present interesting data or that look like a breach. The analytics is way more important than having a console or a portal or a checkbox somewhere. I frankly don't think outsourced SIMs are that great of an idea because you're sending your data off to some la-la land. I think you should just buy a SIM and put it internal in your environment. I think what's more important is to hire somebody to look at that SIM. And whether you hire them full-time, part-time, or you outsource that to somebody like Anitian, we do provide that service, that's what's more important, is have eyes on that SIM regularly, like every week, preferably every day. That's way more important than where you put it. But that much being said, I'm really not a big fan of managed SIMs. I think a lot of them are, they're trying to take away a pain for which there is no real easy way to take away that pain. SIMs suck, and that's that. And you just got to sort of accept that. So, all right, any last questions? If there aren't any more, I'm going to wrap up here, and I'm going to say thank you to all of you who attended. We will be providing a recording of this presentation in about a week. Slides should be available on our SlideShare, and we'll send out that link at some point. But again, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I hope this has been informative and interesting and engaging for all of you. If you'd like to contact me or any of one of our team, here's the contact information. Please feel free. I'd love to hear your feedback on this presentation. I'd love to hear if you think I missed anything. If there's any pieces of data or information or thoughts, or if I went a little too long on something. And yeah, I know my scars about VARs. I'm getting over that, right? But please, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this presentation. So thank you all for attending today. Everybody have a great day and have a great weekend as well.